Greetings and welcome back to room 303, Senior English B, and we now turn to Adrienne Sue's Escape from the Old Country on page 752 of your MyPerspectives volume. I want to go back to 745 for just a second. Let's introduce ourselves to Sue. Born in 1967, raised in Atlanta, Georgia. She did graduate from Ratliff College at Harvard U and received a Master of Fine Arts from the University of Virginia. She's published 3 books of poetry. She teaches at Dickinson College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. She says that, quote, "Writing goes best for me when it's woven into everyday life," end quote. We're going to see that in the text, Escape from the Old Country. Let's talk a little bit about background of this poem. Escape from the Old Country is a poem from Sue's collection Sanctuary, published in 2006. It's about being the child of parents who immigrated to the United States from China. Like much of Sue's work, the poem illuminates what it means to be a member of a community, whether it be a family, a neighborhood, or an ethnic group. Now let's go ahead and annotate as we go on page 752. We'll listen to the reader and then we'll have some comments at levels 1, 2, and 3 once we're finished.
Escape from the Old Country by Adrienne Sue. I never had to make one, no sickening weeks by ocean, no waiting for the aerograms that gradually ceased to come. Spent the babysitting money on novels, shoes, and movies, yet the neighborhood stayed empty. It had nothing to do with a journey not undertaken, not with dialect, nor with a land that waited to be rediscovered, then rejected. As acid rain collected above the suburban hills, I tried to imagine being nothing, tried to be able to claim I have no culture and be believed. Yet the land occupies the person, even as the semblance of freedom invites a kind of recklessness. Tradition, unobserved, unasked, hangs on tight. Ancestors roam into reverie, interfering at the most awkward moments, first flirtations in doorways and dressing rooms. But of course, here in America, no one escapes. In the end, each traveler returns to the town where everyone knew she hadn't even been born.
Now there are a number of things that we'll want to say about this poem, but let's work 2B really quickly. We often like to start at level 2B, the rhetorical level of a text. Not what Sue says, but how Sue says it. Notice that the poem is divided up into stanzas of 2 lines. Do you see this? So we want to be paying attention to the way that works. Also, notice how she plays games with punctuation. For example, take a look at lines 24-25. She uses the dash, which will remind us, of course, of Emily Dickinson's poetry. You can put that at 3A. But then notice we'll begin with a new stanza, but of course, 3 words, with a period, which is, of course, not a sentence at all. And then the "here in America, no one escapes" should be a continuation in many ways of the very thought of "but of course," but notice there's a period and then the capital H. So we're going to have to ask, what exactly is Sue doing as she comes to the end of this poem and speaks about the ubiquitous nature, the ever-present nature of American culture? There's no way to escape both the American culture as well as the old culture, the escaping from the old country, as she will call it. Notice she begins by saying, "I never had to make one." Now it's not clear exactly what the one is that she's referencing at the beginning of the poem. Obviously we're going to try and figure that out as we go. Then she says, "No sickening weeks by oceans, no waiting for the airgrams," that is to say letters sent by air, "that gradually cease to come." In other words, she begins by saying her movement into America from the old country was for her almost immediate in some ways. She spent the babysitting money on novels, shoes, movies. In other words, beginning to take in the culture. Yet the neighborhood stayed empty. Now, the neighborhood that she's speaking to here can be either the actual physical neighborhood or it can be the neighborhood of the mind, right? It had nothing to do with a journey not undertaken, not with dialect, nor with a land that waited to be rediscovered, then rejected. And then an interesting simile, as acid rain collected above the suburban hills, I tried to imagine being nothing, try to be able to claim, I have no culture, and be believed. In other words, there's this process of coming into the new culture, the American culture, and coming to terms with the fact that somehow she wishes to escape her ancient culture, her Chinese culture, and somehow be believed when she says, I have no culture. Of course, this will lead us now to the key line of the poem, and yet let's say it out loud for your notes right away. One of the central messages in 2A of this poem is, you can't escape culture. It's the air we breathe. It's the language we speak or learn to speak. It's the views of the world that we adopt or we don't adopt. This is what we mean when we say we are the stories that we tell, the stories we retell, the stories we accept. We're also the stories we reject. Notice the next line here. Yet the land occupies the person, even as the semblance of freedom invites a kind of recklessness. Now, I mean, we could spend a long time talking about what these lines actually mean. It's a brilliant, brilliant poem, and it's a brilliant key set of lines. Notice she talks about when one migrates or immigrates to a new country, to a new land, it occupies the person even, and then another interesting simile, as the semblance of freedom invites a kind of recklessness. Now, the question of whether, in fact, there is real freedom for the immigrant has always been of much debate. There's, of course, America is a land of opportunity, but a land of opportunity to do what in regards to that opportunity? There's always been a lot of debate about that. To behave in reckless ways, that is to say, to adopt the new culture and to forget about the old culture can be reckless. Notice the next word is tradition at line 20, comma, unobserved, unasked, hangs on tight. It's hard to escape. It's hard to escape the prior culture, the first culture, the first air that you breathe, right? Ancestors roam into reverie, interfering at the most awkward moments. First, flirtations in doorways and dressing rooms. And then there's the dash, as we were saying, reminding us of Emily Dickinson's work. But of course, and then a period. It's as if in the dead middle of the line 25, there's a finality about the fact that sooner or later, the old culture is assumed by the new culture, because she'll say it here in America, no one escapes. In the end, each traveler returns to the town where everyone knew she hadn't even been born. Well, the finality of a culture and the ways in which one is overcome by that culture, and the first culture is often lost in the process, tragically so. Many of us would argue that it is a real tragedy that in America we can't and don't often celebrate as much as we should other cultures, as we subsume all other cultures within our American, our Western culture. Let's talk really quickly at level 3A. What are the titles that come to mind here for you that speak directly to the idea of the loss of cultures? We can go back even to, in this collection, we have the Seafarer that's provided for us from the Exeter book. I mean, all the way back to our first comments, we were dealing with this idea of the loss of another time, the loss of another home, the loss of another culture. We can think about any number of other titles that you may want to write down. What are for you the best titles that really highlight that idea of the losing of what was once had, culturally speaking? And then finally at 3B, how do you deal with this very notion, this very question for you yourself? What is it like to come to terms with the fact that you live in a culture that can be in some ways so smothering, so occupying, that it will remove any possibility of celebrating other cultures as well? To what degree are we, as de Tocqueville said many years ago, a melting pot of cultures? Do you find that we still are? Do we celebrate other cultures? Where do you come down on that? And to what degree do you feel like we need improving in this area in American culture? Adrienne Sue's Escape from the Old Country, challenging us. I hope this will turn you on to more of her amazing stuff. Thank you.